Hello, sexy. Why are you so attractive? I see an idea of how amazing you could be, and my lower self makes me currently feel hard as stone. You must remind me of my grand mom. Almost no people in the world knows it, but there are three types of attraction. Opposites do attract, but so do sameness and familiarity. We therefore need a multidimensional understanding of attraction. Comfort zone attraction is to attract more of your identity to your life, while the ideation type of attraction is to be attracted to something new and novel yet to be created. Between the two exists attraction for transcendent wholeness, which is all about unifying paradoxes or opposites. This third form of attraction comes with heavy shadow work and is not always realistic to obtain or accomplish in romantic relationship if not both individuals are really leaning into the change required. Keep also in mind that there are way more ways to find balance in a world with many people, or even with your own inner self makeup. When trying to attach with a romantic partner, studies show that it's likely that one finds someone similar to the mother or father, or even just a friend from childhood, from the same society one was raised themselves. This makes sense because we are attracted to the easy familiarity, and we feel comfortable with how much we already know about it, and how used we are to repeating the pattern without much conscious energy spent. This is why censors must get the medal when it comes most secure attachment out there, also in relationships. They simply know how to do human and how to sustain it reliably. That does not, however, mean that censors always end up in good marriages and relationships. In fact, may they be so eager on watering the grass where they are, to the extreme extent that they might not truly look through the ideal and optimal options beforehand. In Cataronic's attachment style theory, intuitive personalities struggle to attach. They tend to find it boring and too routine, but also oftentimes inherently painful and difficult. That being said, intuitive personalities are experts in secure detachment, which is why they more carefully and successfully find or manifest partners they actually want, despite how hard it is for them to keep them. Detachment is also needed if one wants to be less clingy and preoccupied with their partner in a way that, to most people, may feel exhausting or smothering. The ideal or optimal attachment is therefore one where people are also skilled enough in detachment to avoid excess worry, preoccupation, and possessiveness. Dismissive preoccupied is not a real attachment style label in established psychology literature, but Cataronic's attachment theory figured it was no good term for it yet. This attachment style basically makes a person attached to another person through thoughts and systems, as if in a business relationship. The relationship is still dismissive of emotional closeness, but still feels close or safe as a preoccupation or possession. Similar to the anxious preoccupied, does the dismissive preoccupied react negatively if the attachment seems to be on unstable ground? The dismissive preoccupied, in that instance, may use cold and harsh but realistic logic as a way to convince one to stay, and that this is the only logical thing to do. Essentially is the main wish for this attachment style to have a safe and secure form for stability, but its dismissiveness towards emotionality makes this attachment style more popular or successful in business and work relationships, even if proving itself important also in romantic relationships. A helpful context to understand this attachment style is that it will not ghost your presence. He will not want you out of the house, and he does not want to be less physically present with you, but he may not want to connect emotionally. The further we move towards disorganized attachment, the more the attachment will be disturbed by frequent dissociative tendencies such as ghosting or ADHD, or sudden behavioral personality changes of physical expression, resurfacing from traumatic content in the repressed lower animal. This problem is opposite to that of the sensing side, in which the person can't even imagine what their life could be like if other options were to be explored. Not much to sensing personalities seems to exist outside of their habitual self, living so comfortably in their body or own reality that they didn't even learn to consider better possibilities and ideals. Disorganized attachment should learn to get into their body. Preoccupied sensory attachment should learn to get out of their body. The antidote is, therefore, naturally the transcendent function, where all paradoxes can be unified in one grasping. The attachment will also be more than rather random in its grip, if detachment is used actively in the process as a philosophical and reflective tool. Keep in mind that various people behind attachment theory define their terms somewhat differently, due to how attachment coaches themselves have different ideas about what these styles actually mean. In Katz's attachment style theory, disorganized attachment and fearful avoidant are closely related siblings, but the fearful avoidant, in terms of descriptive words, has more of an emotional tone to it, while the word disorganized instead resonates generally with the inability to settle or establish a steady foot into some sort of habitual or secure pattern. If I could rename the fearful avoidant term, however, I'd rename it fearfully detached, just to not confuse it with the thinking side's inferior feeling, which is what results in avoidance for feeling intimacy, which is also how we generally use the word avoidant in attachment style theory context. All the sides are in actuality in denial relative to each other, however. The thinker types, due to unhealthy feeling, become avoidant of emotional intimacy. The intuitive types, due to unhealthy sensing, become unstable when re-encountered with attachment traumas that made them leave or dissociate with the body in the first place. Any unresolved trauma will resurface in their presence if reminded of it, which happens especially if their safeguards are compelled to open. In other words, physical safety actually becomes a trigger, because it also allows the traumatic shadow content from the past to resurface. That means if sensory tissue wants to open or relax on a deep psychological level, it can feel unsafe and even contracting at first. This same mechanism is likely happening with sensor heroes if they ever discover the safety in intuition or heaven. The safety in heaven becomes the very thing that makes them scared, because their acceptance of metaphysics was suppressed and disbelieved for a very real reason. If metaphysics is proven to be real, can one no longer easily and confidently assume the monster under the bed to be a fantasy no matter what? Everything suddenly becomes a possibility, which is the opposite of the sensory preference, which is certainty and tangibility. That's what they have a preoccupied attachment to. Sensing types, due to inferior intuition, comfortably settle with less comfort than they could realistically dream of. And feeling types, due to inferior thinking, may ignore how optimal functionality also tends to have an important position also, even in emotion-driven relationships. Interestingly, it should be said that the secure attachment one sees in sensing types is often a result of fear and insecurity. They might be prone to unwavering loyalty and growing together, no matter what, as a result of being scared of the unknown. A sensing personality who developed more intuition is therefore able to not only create a comfortable relationship, but also a relationship they actually desire to have from their own metaphysical choice. Something that is not only comfortable but also fun and inspiring. Yet, however, taxing to the senses, as they are violated or ignored by inferior sensing. Like how the top of a tree blooms and sprouts new branches and exciting new possibilities, does the roots of a tree seek to nurture a stable foundation for itself to grow upon. It's strange if you think about it. Buddhism glorifies non-attachment, but the real truth is that both attachment and detachment are as important. Spiritual people, hence intuitive people, may glorify detachment or non-attachment initially, but that's because they, in that stage of development, have yet to see how attachment allows them to be in their bodies. It's good to dissociate, or disassociate, I should say, so that one can observe one's physical thoughts and feelings. But it's also important to install new beliefs and behaviors, which is to attach something new to the habitual self. Detach to attach. An extra philosophical note and precision should be added. One can, and realistically probably has, a degree of several attachment styles at once. For instance, an INFP will typically have introverted anxious preoccupied, FISI, ambiverted fearful avoidant FINE, and extroverted dismissive avoidant NETE. That being said, considered a feeling hero more than anything, can the INFP attachment typically be summarized as anxious attachment, since that is the peak emotional association. Their main struggle is therefore not typically to balance preoccupation and detachment, but instead is their struggle the disconnect with reason and logic itself. One could say that it's their relationship with business, society, industry, and so forth that suffers the most. However, The mix of attachment style makeup will naturally be different from INFP to INFP relative to how they currently have integrated the cognitive functions. Many INFPs are best in FISI, inner life, which makes them stable and warm in close relationships, while the lack of FESE can make them less warm with larger collectives, neglecting the emotional sensing needs of a group, only being aware of the philosophical needs of the group instead, which is represented through NETE. More than anything, it could also be understood that healing our unresolved sensing content, with such as somatic work, helps the most when it comes to human attachment, while MBTI integration for healthy attachment has even more to do with enlightenment, or real Disney magical relationships, or even global ascension, than it has to do with regular biological and physical well-being as humans in and of itself. Optimal attachment is somewhat beyond healthy human attachment, because it's a state of living between heaven and earth, which is to attach heaven to earth, as opposed to attaching earth to earth itself. When we attach heaven to earth, we create what we call the second heaven, or the kingdom of God. Hell ye, when hell becomes a hell yes. Let's live there forever, future baby, swag peace. Heart emoji with a happy mew behind. Codependence is co-attachment, and it belongs to a second dimensionality of attachment theory, yet to be discovered by the established world. While codependence is in current common sense language explained as dependence on another person, in actuality it may have more to do with being collectively attached to different earthly things, made of the past and oftentimes due to an avoidance of one's own past or one's own body. This is why people with codependence are attached to earth. In that sense, this function is healthy in that it is the state of being you need to deeply connect or identify with the nature and with humanity as a whole. Yet does it alone only activate SE? And therefore, if overused, it is a neglect of own physical substance. People often can use codependence as a distraction from one's own inner physical trauma and turmoil as a coping mechanism. Thus in reality, this function is not about being hopelessly attached to just one other person, but instead about being hopelessly running away from one's own individual physical structure, typically due to avoidance of own dark physical content. They focus on everything else, physical than their body or past memories, to find relief from their own lack of healthy inner physical stability and safety, and partly also as unconsciously motivated by the darkness in own physical self, because a physical self in suffering is looking for survival, and therefore hyper-focus on external sensory reality in a way that is reactive and hypervigilant. These people tend to trust bodies of evidence else than themselves when it comes to subconscious or physical material, hence are they codependent in their sensing. Since they cannot trust their own physical senses, but they trust the general subconscious of others. Example: study a collective body of rats or humans to get a somewhat reliable conclusion about common sense behavior that makes clinical psychology research, for instance, very attractive as a resource to understand how the subconscious mind works. It can explain a lot, if not most, of human behaviorism, at least as long as the behaviors are reactive and automatic in nature. Yes, clinical psychology is codependent, because it depends on everybody to have a cohesive human experience or body. Symbolically, the roots of a tree are codependent because they are co-roots, and the tree is dependent on them to get the nutrients it needs. Codependency is, therefore, also naturally a part of a healthy individual, both as trees and as humans. SE can be both SEFE and SETE, therefore NFJs are codependent emotionally and NTJs are codependent logically. These are two different ways to be enmeshed with the collective ego, which is simply a complex and shared habitual structure. To be enmeshed with this is the same as being embodied with it. It really is not good or bad. It simply is, to allow oneself to be embodied with a part of one's sensory identity, which in this case is earth and nature itself. Interdependence is ambiverted sensing. When having both extroverted and introverted sensing, will one be able to be the identity of both the game and the character in it. Ambiversion identify and embody deeply both the past body wisdom of earth itself and also in their individual body and own individual ego construction, even the particle too. Ambiversion tends to have the healthiest egos, since its ego is made of habitual physical substance suited both for the shared and the individual world. One could say that these people will use the ego as it is currently in human evolution, designed to operate both on basic and specific levels. It's a very safe and dependable approach of being human. Independence is instead to depend on own physical substance. It is required for personal boundaries and own personal agency. The more independence one has, the more their reactions will differ from what is commonly normal. They will in many ways be a new configuration of the human species itself. You could say they will be autism-like, struggling both to understand the body of the collective as well as to make sense for the collective in return. It's as if the person is an alien rather than a human in some ways. Without SE, will independence simply become isolating and too blind to how everybody as a group perceives them? The SI hyper-independence may, without meaning to, disregard other people's reactions and wonder how they didn't just react differently in a way that was more of an own and independent reaction separate from the norms. Sometimes SI hyper-independence is on purpose developed because they think the common human behavior is stupid. The reality, however, is that most people react the same way, and the more we know what is typical in that common sense, the more easily we get along with other people as physical entities without demanding them to philosophize or get to know us individually through time. It will, in other words, help the masses to react in ways that make the isolated person better understood, despite the individual's quirky sense he is operating in. It depends on the angle of perception, but it can be understood that introversion is self-absorbed or selfish, while extroversion is self-abandoning. Extroversion without introversion heals collectives but damages individuals. Introversion without extroversion heals individuals but damages collectives. What is the goal of the individual? Individuation completes the inner torus field. This is achieved when an individual has mastered all the introverted functions. When SITI and SIFI have connected with NIFI and NITI, are the physical body and the metaphysical body co-joined into a wholeness that completes God's Son. It's, if you will, symbolic of the Hercules state. Now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Inconscious, interconscious, and co-conscious. Yes, I made up these terms, but they make nonsense. In actuality, these are more so variants of superconsciousness or metaphysicality. The subconscious mind can perceive as the world. The conscious mind can perceive the world, but the superconscious mind can create it. To be inconscious is to find your own soul dependable. This is different than dependence, in that the very dependence of the soul is the very nature of not depending on what is physical or stable. The self becomes anything, as if the self was once Mew but vanishes and might return as any Pokemon she likes of the physical kind. Inconscious focus will, however, depend on innate soul faculties, such as its inherent capacity to imagine and manifest. All superconscious energy can choose to create new physical bodies for themselves. The reason why this form of dependence is paradoxically the opposite of grounded dependence is because it's free will. Free will can change at any time, and thus has it all to do with knowing that one can blindly trust the unknown and uncertain to reveal insights and free will to oneself. It's different or opposite from depending on a substance one knows is the same every single time. The inconscious introverted intuition without extroverted intuition will focus on its own creations and own soul faculties. The more inconscious one perform, the more will their manifestations and future focus differ from what is commonly focused upon as a possible possibility. Without the co-conscious or extroverted intuition, the inconscious focus might create too much vision and creation at odds with the collective vision. If this happens, the soul might get less assistance from heaven, resulting in a lower amplitude of metaphysical energy or support to create what they want. Additionally, should it be said that inconscious people often are inconscious because they left their physical body or introverted sensing. If one uses only the power of the unconscious to manifest one's desire, but forgot to cure or improve the broken animal in their lower body, may the desire become unconsciously materialistic and animalistic in the worst state of its sensory or animalistic being. Hence, Can the unconscious manifest both as Hitler or Jesus, depending on where the unconscious manifestation power were used? The atom bomb was also invented by the unconscious, but more correctly, it was actually invented by the subconscious animal in a wounded state. That wounded animal simply all of a sudden had access to its soul faculties and misused that power, for else than heaven on earth. The unconscious is meant to give individual souls the capacity to create their own worlds and own influence upon the collective world. It also gives entities the ability to escape from their past self as a dissociative coping mechanism. But also when together with the past self in paradoxical union, is it able to reframe and heal their past, if daring to look at and become embodied in its darkness, making sure that no entity is completely governed by their own past, if unfair or unlucky. The unconscious is also your more default and most used body in the afterlife, when we live in heaven. You can consider the unconscious your own individual and eternal light body. The co-conscious or extroverted intuition is heaven itself, and simply is the collective of all souls. You could symbolically envision the top part of a tree where branches are different bodies having their own soul, and at the tip of them, in their unconscious, constantly seeking where to grow in the future, by holding their own individual metaphysical vision of where they want to grow. Extroverted intuition is simply the combination of all of those intentions and thus exists above the tree in every possible quantum place. That's why we say personalities such as ENTP and ENFP have their heads in the clouds. It's because they literally do. Another example, in Norwegian, the word for supernatural is overnatural. We call the superconscious above the ground for overnatural because heaven is literally above our nature, hence above the forests. Unconscious people such as INTJ and INFJ also have their head in the cloud, but it's different in that it looks energetically like a super tall and super narrow crown. They channel spirit and similar through that channel, getting guidance from a very high but narrow heaven, hence their individual heaven or light. Heaven is responsible for everything new or unborn. Earth is responsible for everything reactive, believed and sustained. NESC, when co-joined, therefore becomes New Earth. It's the capacity to value both what should be birthed or changed, and also capacity to know what to keep and sustain. New Earth happens when Earth itself awakens, and is directly related to how many individuals that have reached Christ consciousness, or what Carl Jung called individuation within the global collective. However, Christ-conscious people have individuated and have yet to collectivate, which Carl Jung somehow have missed out on, despite knowing about the importance of both introversion and extroversion as equals. Some beings may arguably collectivate first and individuate second in their development, but a being that collectivates must by definition be or enmesh with a collective group entity or group being. This also explains why people sometimes may heal and transcend simultaneously at the same time, while attending in community experiences such as Joe Dispenza retreats. Its peak healing miracles likely happens through ambiversion.